Life does a pretty terrible job of preparing people for marriage. The latest stats now show the divorce rate's at 42%. 42% of new marriages now end in divorce. Think about that for a second. That's nearly half of marriages. And the stats are even higher in the United States. But yet people continue to charge ahead blindly. Why do they do that? If I told you there was a 42% chance that when you left your house today you'd be hit by a car, you probably wouldn't take the risk, right? Or if you did take the risk, you'd take extreme care when you did. But what extreme care do people take when in relationships? Now that's the big question that continues to baffle divorce lawyers. And that's why I set out to approach some of the top lawyers in the field for their best advice for any of you viewers who hope to one day get married. I'm so glad I did it because honestly, it's completely changed the way I myself have looked at relationships. People have seemed to have forgotten that marriage is at its core a legal contract. Now, usually we get advice before signing a legal contract, don't we? Or we have someone explain to us what it means or what our obligations are, etc. Well, marriage, you don't get any of that. There's no piece of paper saying, oh, by the way, this is the most legally significant thing you'll ever do, and here is why. I think the fact that couples now probably spend more time choosing their wedding cake than planning their future with somebody, their financial future, their financial plans, their kids, business goals, the family goals, etc. will forever baffle me. So please, I implore you to listen and take note of the advice that we are about to give you in this short video. I've handpicked 7 of the best pieces of advice I have taken from recent conversations with the leading divorce lawyers in the field. But look, don't let the tone of this video put you off marriage. That is not the intent. Marriage is a bit like a lottery in that if you do win, what you win is so great that it's worth trying. It's worth buying the ticket and taking the leap, despite the odds admittedly no longer being in your favor. Let me make that very clear before we begin. Now, the first piece of advice that was most common amongst divorce lawyers is that your relationship isn't going to change that much just because you're getting married. And what they mean by this is relationships don't just change because you're getting married. You're not going to change all that much, and the person that you're marrying isn't going to change all that much either. Now, according to my conversations, apparently many clients would come into the lawyer's office, looking completely shocked, saying, I can't believe he or she is behaving so vindictively. And they'd say, well, what were they like during the marriage? And they'd say, well, they could be vindictive, yes, but mainly to other people. Or they'd say, I can't believe he's suddenly being like this over money. And they'd say, well, what was he like during marriage with money? And they'd say, well, yeah, sometimes I guess he could be like that with money, but mainly with other people. Okay, well, why do you think there'd be any different during a divorce? You're not together anymore. There may not be any more loving feelings there. You're going to see people's true sides during divorce. So take some time to discover their true sides during the relationship while you can. Now, the second best piece of advice that I wrote down here is an absolute must, and that is to have a pre-relationship conversation. Guys, do not ignore this one. So what is the initial conversation? Well, it's one that most of us don't have, probably because we're way too infatuated in love and it seems like nothing could possibly go wrong. But according to divorce lawyers, it is absolutely crucial that both partners at some point sit down and communicate their expectations as early as possible, because in the haze of infatuation, sometimes we're seduced into believing that someone else's traits and hobbies and interests are exactly what we've been looking for. But when that haze fades away, those can be the very things that cause you to break up. If one of you loves to be social, for example, and outgoing, and the other one prefers to be a homebody, now that's fine, but you need to have a conversation about how you can make that work. Or if one of you loves spending time with family and the other one prefers to stay away from their family, you'll need to discuss how you're both going to share that responsibility. You have to communicate your expectations as early as possible, because when things start to go sour, these things will just be fuel for the fire. This is, however, only one of 2 recommended conversations you're encouraged to have. The next, in my opinion, the most important, is the pre-marriage conversation. Now, every single lawyer or divorcee I have spoken to in preparation for this video has collectively agreed on the value of this action, so do not ignore it. And that is to sit down with your partner prior to marriage and discuss how you are going to make the marriage work. Think about it. The idea of agreeing to legally and contractually bind yourself to someone without even having a conversation about where are we going to live? How are we going to raise children? What is your parenting style? Who's going to look after them? How are we going to resolve fights? How are we going to deal with money problems? I guarantee you, if people had this one conversation, that 42% divorce rates that I gave you, halved. I am sure of it. This conversation in some way or another is and must be a prerequisite to a successful marriage, and what I believe is the #1 tip from seasoned divorce lawyers. Now that leads us to our 4th tip, which again became a consistent theme when speaking to these divorce lawyers, and that is that couples must discuss their finances. So one of the most important conversations you need to have with your partner before getting married is about your finances. Now, most people are out there making their own money, and by the time they get married, they've got their own bank accounts, they've got their own debts and credit cards, student loans. You need to understand each other's financial situation and how you plan to pay things back or afford things. Couples don't really talk about money for some reason. It's important early on in your relationship to determine each of your spending habits, your debts, your savings, your financial goals. Create a joint budget, list your debts, and discuss your financial dreams. It might not be the most romantic conversation, but it is essential for a long and healthy relationship. Now, this point leads nicely onto our fifth and really interesting tip, which is that if you have assets to protect, get a prenup. Now, some of you may already be put off by this one, but imagine this for me. You've got a large inheritance coming in the future, or you're hoping to sell that business that you've built up your whole life, or perhaps you've got an investment property that you owned before marriage. And then 3 years into a failed marriage, you realize that now you have to share all of that with someone who may not have been in your life all that long. This is why prenuptial agreements exist, and almost all divorce lawyers and attorneys that I've spoken to recommend them for anyone with premarital assets that they want to protect. Guys, again, nearly half of marriages fail, and whether or not you think yours might be different, planning for the worst is just basic common sense in my opinion. I know this will divide opinion on many of you, and that's fine. I'd love to hear from you in the comments and see what you think on this particular topic, but a prenuptial agreement will not only protect your assets, it could also save you thousands in messy divorce proceedings when you're sat in court for the 5th time fighting over who gets what. Now, not only this, remember, with prenups, there is also mandatory financial disclosure. In other words, you are legally obligated to disclose in full your full financial position, including debts. This is one of the reasons why it's recommended, because it is a way that you can be sure that you know the full extent of your partner's finances, including loans and hidden debts. Now, as a suggestion, my suggestion for this tip would be to approach the prenup conversation as a mutual protection measure rather than a sign of mistrust. Now, I've done an incredible 8-minute video purely on the topic of prenup, including how to agree a prenup and everything to include to protect your assets. See that video here and link down below. Now, our penultimate tip is a tip that again comes from a very common theme amongst divorce lawyers, which is advice for couples who are in the process of divorcing. And that is, this is one of the worst things that you can do, which is turn your divorce into a win-lose contest. If you're not careful, divorce can turn really, really, really nasty. One lawyer I spoke to, I think, told me they'd even see people throwing their shoes at spouses in the middle of the courtroom. If it ever turns into a win-lose contest, with the amount of bad blood and hatred that can manifest, people can lose everything. And let me tell you this for a fact, the only real winners in that situation are the lawyers like what I spoke to for this video, who at the end of the day will keep getting paid. Now, when you represent people in a divorce, you see good people at their very worst. So the biggest mistake that people make when they're getting divorced is to make it into a winner and loser situation, trying to claw for everything they can get. They get so caught up into standing their ground that they lose focus of what really matters and the collateral damage that is happening around them. The goal of divorce is to get to the other side, not to get stuck in the middle. That's a really important tip, guys. Last, that leads me to my final piece of advice, which in this particular case I heard from a practicing New York divorce attorney, which is not to ignore the initial warning signs. Now, the reason I've chosen this advice is because I too can relate to it from what I have observed, because you constantly hear the same question being circulated and discussed on social media, and that is, how much should a guy spend on the first date? And everybody's there trying to discuss what is the right amount for a man to spend on a woman. Now, many women don't do this, but let me tell you, some women seem to set their expectations before any date that a man must spend at least a certain amount for them to qualify for their time. Now, this is unfortunately very common, and divorce lawyers have identified this as the root cause of so many unstable and unsuitable relationships and marriages. If your relationship is transactional at the outset, it will remain so to some degree or another. And if it ever came to divorce, chances are that would be purely a transaction too. Now, I assure you, in no uncertain terms, if a woman has a genuine desire for you, she is not going to care about the amount of money you put down on that date. Valuable women will grade more on effort than on money. And if you meet one of those women, you will have a far, far higher chance of a healthy and balanced relationship, according to leading divorce lawyers. Now, don't get me wrong. It is always important to be generous. Yes, that's not what I'm saying. Just don't lead with your wallet is what they're saying. Now, before we wrap up, it is crucial that you don't skip away just yet. Not until I have given you the final piece of advice, the crucial 4 signs that your partner might actually not be suitable for marriage. Now, you might not want to hear this, but I encourage you to do so anyway. But you might need to. Number 1, they avoid serious conversations. If your partner constantly and consistently dodges discussions about finances or future goals or simple planning, then that's a warning sign. It may indicate an unwillingness to build a future together. Number 2, they are not transparent about their financial matters. So if your partner is secretive about their income or their debts or their spending habits, this can be a huge warning. This is so common and can lead to major problems later on. Number 3, they're completely unwilling to discuss a prenup. So if your partner completely dismisses or gets angry at any mention of a prenup, it might be signaling a reluctance to plan for the future or acknowledge potential risks. And number 4, signs of controlling behavior. So this is an obvious one. Be wary of any partner who seeks to dominate decisions without considering your input. Over time, this can lead to significant imbalances and resentment. Now, that wraps up all the advice I want to give you today. This stuff is gold. Trust me, these lawyers have been working with situations like yours their whole careers. Remember, what a lot of us are looking for in someone to date is very different than what we are looking for in someone to marry. What makes for a good boyfriend or girlfriend and what makes for a good spouse or partner, especially if you want to have kids, is a tremendously different thing much of the time. So it is absolutely crucial to at least have those 2 conversations I spoke about earlier in the video, the pre-relationship conversation, the pre-marriage conversation. Now listen, I want to hear from you on this topic. I want to hear from your experiences and the advice that you have learned from the process or from your own observations. And let's get a discussion going down in the comments. Also, let me know any future topics you'd like me to explain. As always, if you've liked or learned anything from this video, please subscribe to the channel. I put in a lot of hours making these videos and I'd love to continue to do that. Your support means the world to me. As always, remember though, this content is educational. It is not specific legal advice. If you need help with your relationship, consult a professional. That being said, I'll see you in the next video.